evaluation question 3. What have you learned from your audience feedback? So if we go into research and planning and go down to the categories and to my magazine, we'll go down and scroll right to the start of the year. Okay, so again, not all of these will be audience feedback, but I'll read them out and make sure that I point them out to you. So I didn't really start planning my magazine till quite late on, I'd say, in the production. It was definitely after my poster, and I didn't use as much audience research to make my poster at all. I used a lot more sort of my own thoughts and feelings about them. I did get a lot of audience feedback, don't get me wrong, but not as much as I did for my trailer and for my poster as well. And I think that allowed me to be a bit more creative with my magazine. So here we go. I didn't get any audience feedback on the name of my magazine because I thought at this stage I just need to go for it. It needs to reflect me as a person as well as the product and the film that I'm trying to sell and my audience. So what I did was I went to my film magazine name ideas and I noted down a few, had a look, and I thought, yeah, I'm gonna go for Scream. Just because I like horror films. The magazine is a horror film magazine, and I knew that I didn't really want it to be too conventional with the horror magazine. So what I did was I thought, well, if I go for the name of a horror film and something that sounds quite horrific, and I sort of change that up with something that isn't conventional with horror, then maybe if I put them together, it'll work and it will give off the impression of a horror film magazine. So if we go up to my first sort of layout designs, this was before I actually decided on the font, on the title. So if we have a look, you can see that I took influence excuse me. I took influence from some of the other magazines that I'd seen, that I'd analysed. Fangoria, for example, with this one here, I took the sidebar and things like that, and I just had a bit of a play around with where the picture would go and things like that, and I did that again here. So I had a look at it and I decided to go for the top one, but I didn't want the sidebar. I didn't want to change it that much, so I thought of taking a picture and then I'd go from there and see what would look good. So I started out with making the mastheads. I didn't really consult on the font here. I wanted more to consult on the style of the font, because what I wanted to do was use the font of the Scream film again to link it to that horror genre. Really making sure that I got the genre across when I'm going very unconventional with colour schemes and things like that. So what I did was I went for that font because that was what I personally wanted to do and I thought would be best. And then I made the creative decision to use different like bevels and effects and things like that. And then I put them all together and I put that over to my target audience and let them decide basically whether I used any effects or not. Now I got a survey back and people voted mainly for the one with no effects on it at all. They thought it looked much more crisp and much more clean, and it looked more professional. It didn't need the whole kit and caboodle to look professional and look good, which I really wanted that feedback as well, because I tend to I really wanted that feedback as well because I tend to over stylize things. I tend to use way more of the editing blending options than I should, and I just wanted to see the audience's opinion on whether I should dial that back, and they decided that I should, so that's what I did. And I ended up going for the one with no effects at all, as you can see here. Then I did an interview, and he said that it looked more professional to have the one with no effects on it, and you can hear that in here. He says that it looks more professional, it looks better, it looks clean, and that was basically just to back up the reason for me choosing the one with no effects on it as well. So if we keep going up, I actually analyze it, and it says he liked the second masthead because it stood out more and said a lot about the magazine and its content. I feel as though this is a very good reason, and links to what David said. I might still get a third interview with Anne. I also interviewed David, who is a prime member of my target audience, and he said the same thing, which I must have passed in scrolling. So then, again, another thing that I didn't really get an audience's opinion on. I thought that David looked quite young to be playing the detective who was meant to be look a bit rugged and a bit out of his time, really, down in the dumps. So what I tried to do was make a beard on him, and let's just say it didn't really work. So I decided to go against that. If it did work, I would have got my audience's opinion anyway, but it didn't, so I didn't. Again, here, just a bit of stuff to back up the fact that I got audience feedback on that font. Now I had to sort of change the layout again because the layout that I wanted with the murderer and the two people either side, the victims, again, the green screen was too small, and we just didn't have the facilities to do it in a way that would have worked and looked professional. So if we go further on, we'll see that I did have a play around with the posters. We'll just go through this while I talk about it. So I started off with a sort of reddish background because I thought that red really reflected horror. This was me trying to sort of follow the conventions. Excuse me. It was just a bit of a test, really, and I was just having a bit of a play around. Now this is based on my layout, and if we skip ahead a little bit and go a bit further, we see that I add the masthead, and I just leave it in a black block, which it does seem very unprofessional. I looked at a few magazines, and I had a look at what they were doing and where they were placing things as well. And I did get a little bit of research done there, and I added a couple of pictures in. And then the bonfire, and then I tried to edit over that and see whether that would work out well. And it had a border. I downloaded the font. I made sure that it linked, but then I didn't think the font was right for the cover lines, so I changed them, and then I basically ended up with this. And I thought, oh dear. Because yeah, okay, it looked fairly horrific. but I mean the quality of the picture was really low, it was rubbish, and there's so many things wrong with it, and I hated it that much. Even sort of trying to edit it once more again there, that I just binned it. I was like, nope, I couldn't deal with it. I tried changing the fonts a bit. I tried making it a bit better and making it seem a bit more professional, and it just didn't really work. So I didn't get any audience feedback, and I just straight away scrapped it because I hated it. And then I took these pictures of David actually at home using reflector torches and the Canon 1100D, and I sort of roughed him up. I made him look a bit sweaty. I put some water on his hair, roughed him up a little bit, and so I decided to try and make that into a magazine instead. I edited bruises onto him and made him look more sinister, added a little bit of blue hue to his face to make the lighting look a bit more surgical. And apparently I didn't speed this one up, but if we go further across, I copied the layout vaguely. I used the grid to make sure they was the same width for the edge, and then I just made it look a lot more professional. I overlapped things. I wasn't afraid to sort of go against a few conventions like the colour scheme and things like that. And I really thought, you know what, yeah, it does look good. And I was a bit more happy with that one. So once I made a magazine that I was happy with, this one here, I got some audience feedback. I was really happy with it. I thought I'd be done. I thought that was it. Yeah, brilliant, done, professional, cool. So I put it on Facebook, and I got a bit of feedback on it. And my audience actually said issue 666. They thought it was good. They thought that it looked really professional, and they liked the makeup, even though it wasn't actually makeup. I cheated a little bit there and used Photoshop, but they don't know that, and they think it looks realistic, so that helps. So I was quite happy with that. But then I did a little analysis of my magazine, which I did actually put a picture on, but I talked through it, and I said it's good, but the font is far too close to the face. It overlaps the face here, and I got a little bit of feedback from my teacher, and I just asked her, and I was like, look, this doesn't feel right over here lapping the face when this side doesn't overlap the face at all. So she said, yeah, you're right. And so I had a little bit of a work around, a bit of a wobble around, and mixed up the fonts and changed the sizes a bit, and I made sure that there was a nice little barrier between his head and the font, the text. And I thought that looked much more professional and much better. So then I got some final feedback on Twitter and on Facebook as well, I believe. Yep, there we go. And the feedback that I got was, looks good, a lot of work has gone into it, well done. It represents the genre really well. They like the colour scheme. It stands out from the rest of that genre, and the image and the makeup is amazing. It looks realistic. Again, the colour choice is fantastic. Like the font, like the colour. They think it looks very professional, and realistic, and really good work. So my audience really liked it after that, which is quite strange because I really used my own thoughts and feelings on what I thought looked professional and unprofessional, rather than relying on what my audience wanted and what they thought, because I suppose you're never going to please anyone, so you may as well please yourself. And then sort of use the audience as sort of a backup. And then on Twitter, awesome, I want the free poster again. So it does look professional, it looks good, and my audience feedback did kind of shape how it turned out, really. If we go into final products, we'll see the magazine down at the bottom here, and that's the final magazine. So I'm just going to go through a little bit and talk about each section. So the codes and conventions and the layout. Now the codes of conventions I didn't really follow that much. I followed it with the masthead, and my target audience kind of helped me to decide that. They helped me to decide to use fewer effects and blending options on my fonts and stuff, and I think that worked. And the layout, I actually was more influenced by my analysis of other posters than I was by my target audience and what they wanted. So I didn't really learn from my audience feedback there. Whereas with the bruises, again, I did link to the codes and conventions, not having the text on the face, that sort of thing, having a free poster, having a barcode, issue number, date, price, there's the date there, a little tagline, a slogan. And again, that wasn't really from audience feedback, it was more from what I thought and what I was getting from my magazine analysis. So let's think about the genre. So the genre could be quite hard to get across with this magazine because I go so far against the conventions with my color scheme, because usually we get reds, we get blacks, we get darkness, whereas I've gone for a very light color scheme that looks quite surgical. But I still fit with the genre, I think, with the font, Schism, the font there as well, which my audience chose. So for my poster, and I chose to use it here because it's sort of a logo for the film, really. And then take a look behind the scenes of this year's most anticipated horror film. So that links to horror as well. Then we get a scream of horror. We know it's horror. I'm really screaming horror at you. Like, I put horror on this magazine so many times. Everything on here is linked to horror in every way possible. Bruises, we've got the actual image. He looks evil, he looks sinister. But as well as the Screamer magazine. Well, Screamer, a Scream is a horror film. The font is from the horror film Scream, and you might get that. A scream of horror. Horrific, really horrific feel. Horror top 50. I use the word horror so many times. Annabelle Creation, Jigsaw, they're all horror films. Horror Legends, James Wan and Leigh Whannell, who created the Saw films, Dead Silence, Insidious. Lee created Cooties, which is a little horror comedy about children, chicken nuggets, and zombies. It's very strange and very cool. So, pretty much all they do is horror. Apart from more recently, I mean, James has been involved with Fast and Furious 7 and Aquaman and things like that. And Lee's sort of branching out to sci-fi action horror thing-ish with his new film Upgrade. So it's more their old selves. They originated from horror. They were the people of horror in 2005-ish. I mean, Saw came out in 2004, and they just went, they just took off. So they really are an icon of horror. Then Blumhouse, they're the ones that, I mean, their whole aura is horror films. Their logo animation, their I can't remember what they're called, but their little intro basically at the start of the film. You're in a haunted house. You're in a house. There's a ghost. You know, there's a chair flying around the room. There's scary lights and everything. It's horror. So you know we get that they're horror. They're an independent production company who produce horror films. And you know Ouija, I believe, was Blumhouse. You've got Happy Death Day. You've got Get Out. That was Blumhouse, and it's really my favorite production company, and I absolutely love horror. So there we go. And then we've got The Nun, Crooked Man, Happy Death Day, all horror films. So I really linked to my genre there. Then the representation of this character. I've talked about this in question 1 and 2, and probably many other places. But David's character, the representation of him in the magazine, is very, very different from that in the poster and the trailer. In the poster and the trailer, he looks like a normal guy, family man, pretty chill, getting on with his life. Maybe not the the most innocent person in the whole world, but still a guy who's quite cool and normal. Whereas in the magazine, he's got bruises all over his face, he's glaring at the reader, he really looks evil and horrible, and the blue glow sort of makes him look really cold and almost dead, really. He's really roughed up, his, his tie's all undone, his jacket's all hanging off his shoulder, and then the colour scheme as well behind him. He's got grey linking into the white, which sort of it shows his innocence, and then it's that his innocence is tainted. So maybe he isn't really as innocent as we think that his character is throughout the film. It's definitely him in a different stage of his journey, and it shows how there can be a complete split and two different sides to a character, and more than two different sides, which again shows the schism between the characters as well. Um, because after all, in the end, um, the film is about a schism between the two sides of one of the characters and how something went tragically wrong because of that schism. And I think that really gets that across. Reaching the audience. Now, the main thing that reaches the audience here is how different it is from other magazines of its genre. The color scheme is completely different. The fonts are quite professional. They're not over the top or anything, and that sort of targets my target audience because it's different, and people tend to have a love-hate relationship with things that are different. And I think that really draws people in to go and have a look and really read my magazine and have a look at it and want to know more, really. Again, with the protagonist being young, they'll have someone to relate to, someone who is just like them, and it will really target the males. They want to know what's happened to this guy, what's made him turn so strange and weird, and yeah, it really gets that through. Then the narrative. Now, we don't really see much of the narrative in the magazine, and you don't really tend to in magazines on the front cover anyway. They just want to see the star, usually. So we see that there's a change in this character when we link it to the trailer and the poster, but on its own, independently, you don't really see much of the narrative here. So that was my question 3 for my magazine. Evaluation question 3. What have you learned from your audience feedback?